Hello and welcome to CDCT Live. This is Jason Rader. I'll be your host for the next little bit as we talk about the edge and how the edge is everywhere. Today I've got with me Rob Parsons, the Director of Network and Security Go-to-Market, and Jeremy Nelson, the Director of Network Services. Hi, gentlemen.
Morning, Jason.
Good morning.
So, the edge, I guess we're not talking about the guitar player for U2. So we're talking about the sorry, that was, should have, okay, can we edit that out? All right, since we have to continue going forward, let's, we usually start this thing off talking about, what something is, for the folks who've just come in. Obviously, we've had sessions talking about the edge and compute and different things related to that. But I think it's fair. I think there's probably interesting history that kind of goes along with the edge and kind of where we started and where we are now. And that presents basically the business problem that we're kind of focusing on. So why don't we kind of go through that if we can? Somebody define the edge, and then we'll talk about the history of that.
I think that's actually a great place to start, Jason. If you don't mind, Rob, I'll just jump right in. So I think as we look historically around just IT infrastructures and the way that the edge has already had this history of transforming itself. So if we go way back, right, we're talking like mainframe days. The edge was the mainframe, right? And everything had to directly attach to it through serial. So you got green screens that are just directly attached, and all the compute happens in one central location. So that edge was literally that one computing device. And as we've seen, that's grown and transformed. So we introduced mini computing, then we introduced the personal computer, then we see the internet kind of join the fray. And so now we have this new set of perimeter edges. So now we've got the edge, which was traditionally our internal or like our interior network. And then we had an edge that connected us to this public infrastructure. And now, with the introduction of cell phones, we now start to see this mobile. And so we still had these fairly highly contained edges where even for different business or enterprise applications to be accessed, those remote workstations had to still come back to these centralized areas of data. And I think, really what we're seeing now is over the past, couple of months with all the events of 2020, we've seen the explosive growth of cloud. We've seen the explosive growth of work from home. And so we're really starting to see like that next iteration, right? That next iteration of what the edge is. So instead of just perimeter firewalls or interior firewalls protecting particular assets, we now have data and users and endpoints and sensors that are distributed across vast global networks that have really made the edge a lot more fuzzy than I think what it traditionally has been, where it's been a very nice, clear black and white set of delineations on what's mine and what's somebody else's. So.
Well, yeah, we used to have that multi-tiered architecture that took you down to an access layer switch, and that's where everything connected. And now we've got kind of this complex meshed architecture, whether it's SD-WAN reaching into various branches, all of that secured from a SASE perspective. There's a number of different ways to look at it, but Jeremy, you're spot on that as we've evolved, that the data and the devices have become so much more distributed, and we've got this highly flexible connection mechanism. We want to be able to provide the same user experience, whether somebody's connected to an Ethernet line or they're connected to Wi-Fi or 5G or maybe attached to a VPN, whatever it is, we have to give that same experience. And I heard somebody say it the other day, but they said the edge starts with the identity. And I think that really stuck for me, is that, in the modern world, the edge isn't a physical place that you exist, but it's the identity of the user and the device, and that coupling between those two that becomes the edge of wherever you're at in whatever connection mechanism you're using.
No, I think that's a great concept. I mean, from a security perspective specifically, and we've all grown up in this stuff, right? When I was in school, there was no microcomputer program to go to. So, that was something I got after school. But those things, and as you kind of talked about it, Jeremy, being able to put that perimeter around things because it was like a physical location. The mainframe's here, as far as we can connect into it, or then even with remote access capabilities, dialing in, but still that perimeter was kind of part of what's going on. And now the perimeter is completely fuzzy. So I think identity is the way to kind of capture that. So it's not this physical based machine. And I know because we've grown up in this, there's a lot of mentality related to the way people want to deal with that infrastructure, and especially security. We're used to kind of corralling everything in and building a big fence around everything, but that's nebulous at best. We've got to come up with some new approaches to be able to deal with this kind of stuff.
Because organizations don't want to operate like that anymore. Like, that's the reality, right? Like, at the end of the day,
exactly,
we've found that organizations literally can't grow. Like, when we talk about, we look at those histories, right? So the same type of history that we talk about as far as like the evolution of just centralized computing to where we are today, I think we see the same thing as far as the way that businesses attach to and consume information technology assets, and the way that they actually use that as a tool to transform, grow their business, reach new clients, grow into different verticals than maybe they ever would have considered in the past. And so when we think about those disruptors aren't content with being confined to anything. And so when we talk about, physical constraints of an environment, it just doesn't lend itself to disruption. It doesn't lend itself to allowing organizations to grow and to operate in a way that's going to be best for them to grow their business. But I think I love what you also highlighted there, Jason, is that we can't do it irresponsibly. We can't just open it up and be like, cool, be wherever you want, connect into your stuff, right? Like, we have to make sure that, again, and just like Rob was saying, identity, we need to make sure that the people, the devices, and from the locations that we approve are being allowed access to those valuable company assets.
Yeah, so set it up. Jeremy,
go ahead. Sorry, Rob.
I was going to say, I think as we talk about security has really made micro-segmentation ultimately more important than it was before. We talked about identity, and a lot of times we draw the parallel to a network access control type solution and getting that identity, or maybe it's identity and address management or access management through a different system, or it's multi-factor authentication, wherever that identity comes from. But ultimately, how we take action, apply policy, and enforce security based on those attributes that we know, really comes down to that micro seg. And how do we slice things up? Because to your point, everyone kind of wants to go everywhere, not be controlled. So it's not as simple as a north-south kind of security anymore. We have to manage east-west anymore. So microsegmentation gives us the ability to do that. There's lots of tools out there, but ultimately super complex solution. And I know your team manages, designing, developing, and deploying a lot of those for clients. I don't know, do you want to talk about some of the challenges and hurdles that organizations go through as they look at that kind of security model?
Absolutely. I mean, the number one, the first thing that comes to my mind, right, as we're talking about this, we're talking about that proliferation of devices, of endpoints that are connecting these environments. I think one of the first things that we're actually seeing an exponential number of clients who are reaching out looking for assistance in this space. And it's just a matter of what's out there. What is our network today, and what's connected to it? And I think that's one of the biggest things that lots of very large organizations are really struggling with, is just trying to wrap their arms around what really is our infrastructure today. I think it's really easy to be like, okay, well, how many switches, how many access points? That's not even where they're looking at. They're like, what about the types of devices and assets that are attached? Because they're starting to recognize, especially as we think about the healthcare space, the number of different types of overall life-saving equipment that's connected that are being attached to the network, because it increases the ability for healthcare providers to be able to respond and to be able to get immediate actions to those who are in need. But at the same time, those devices are running code, and that code doesn't get regularly updated, just like we see in other parts of the infrastructure. And so being able to identify those endpoints, identify where they're running, like what level of code they're running, how utilized are they adhering to other types of best practices as far as login information. So it's really coming down to just helping organizations wrap their arms around what is our infrastructure today. And what are some of the use cases that we're actually using it for? Because a lot of it doesn't get documented. A lot of it's just organic growth. And so as the use case comes in, people scramble, they get it done, and then they forget about it. And then they don't maintain it, they don't make sure that it's remaining secure and it's meeting the organization's best practices, but they also don't document that it's even out there. So I think that's the first one, Rob, is just helping people understand where they're at as far as their overall, just I think about I'm trying to remember the name of it, but you go to the mall and it's got the whole map and it's got the dummy pin that says you are here, right? I think a lot of organizations are looking for where is my wayfinder? Where am I at now? And then once we understand that, we can figure out how do we get to where we want to be. So I think that's the first step in that journey, is just figuring out where you are and then charting that path, understanding what the business wants out of IT, and then using that to transform your edge to be able to meet those needs.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think, you bring up a good point, because I think there's been so much innovation, so many advances, and we've been running absolutely as fast as we can to embrace these new technologies and capabilities to be able to deliver better to our customers, our clientele, whatever those things are. And I'm talking like in general for industry, that now we're kind of sitting back and now there's this next step. I mean, it's that Moore's law is like kicking us, right? And bandwidth is available and all of this stuff where the possibilities are getting, stuff that was science fiction just a few years ago. But we've got this issue where, and I think what you're pointing out, Jeremy, is folks are coming out going, we've got to kind of wrap our hands around this thing. And it's a complete paradigm shift for them to kind of think about this. I think the identity thing is the right answer. We got to focus on that identity and not just like the entities themselves as well as the users, right? We've got to, if we're going to do a zero trust thing, which a lot of folks are talking about, how that's how we're going to be able to deal with security and how we should deal with security. We're going to have to know those devices, be able to identify them. We have to know those users. We're going to then have to do all the appropriate analytics to be able to sort things out, put the data in the right places. I mean, all of that is way beyond where the average folks are thinking about, what's on my network. And we're at this weird spot where you can easily kind of get left behind if you're not embracing these newer methods of kind of attacking how to manage your network and how to manage the entities on it.
Yep. And you actually touched on something. If I can, go ahead, Rob.
Well, no, go ahead. And then I was going to maybe go into applications a little bit as we think about this and the data and whatnot. So go ahead and finish, Jeremy.
Yeah. And I think this will actually dovetail really nicely into that. Is one thing that you mentioned, Jason, that I really want to kind of point out is that end user component. Is that while we want them to be invested in the security model, it can't impede their day-to-day. If it's too difficult, if they have to jump through too many hoops, right? What does that turn into? It turns into ways where people are looking, how do they circumvent? They're going to get their job done. Exactly. They're going to get their job done because that's what they're there to do. And most people are motivated by success. And so if these infrastructures are getting in their way, they're going to find a way around it. And so I think that's just as important, is to take into consideration that consumption piece.
Awesome. So yeah, I think where I was going to go with this is looking at, the angle of how it's being used. So we kind of talked about the connectivity mechanisms, the connecting anywhere, any way from any device, any mechanism. We talked a little bit about the security component, but we also want to talk about how the network's being used today. So, we've got situations where a huge amount of data is coming in from the edge of the network. We're taking in more intelligence than ever before because it's not just end user devices anymore. It's sensors, it's telemetry, it's OT systems that are now connected into the network. So we've got this opportunity where we're taking in all this data and we have the opportunity to make some really intelligent business decisions on how we're operating. Because at the end of the day, when we're talking to most organizations, they're figuring out how to better their business, not how to better their IT system. The IT is the path to it. So they're looking at how they can intake that data and make some quick decisions on maybe optimizing their manufacturing or their shipping process or whatever it may be. So we've got this flexibility now with the cloud where we've got the option of saying, well, we can intake all this data, we can pump it to a data center, maybe move it to the cloud, we can process it at the data center, we can process it in the cloud, but then we have to make an effect happen down at the edge level again. So do we want to send that data all the way up and then hairpin it back? Or do we want to create some sort of edge compute process, something closer to the edge to say, let's evaluate the data that we've got. Let's prune it down to what's most important for decision making. And maybe we crunch some data right there at the edge and make some quick decisions and archive the rest. But we've got flexibility about how we make those decisions. Obviously, if it's a dashboard for corporate, maybe it lives in the cloud and that's a perfect use case for it. But if it's real time and it needs to affect the operations, it might happen at the edge. And so we've got this situation where all of this is coming together and we're able to drive some really unique outcomes for organizations because we've got that flexibility that we didn't have in the past.
And if I could, Rob, I think, and I'm going to tee you up because I know you've got this stat memorized and I don't. But as we think about that transformation, right? I talked about the end user and that end user consumption model and how we need to kind of cater our overall solutions to that. But if we go back to that model where we started off with mainframe, where it was very much a peer-to-peer, right, point-to-point type of a model where we have a single end user focusing and connecting to a single computing device. And I think one of the things that you highlighted really well is that now there may not even be an end user involved in the majority of our communications going forward. We're starting to see much more machine-to-machine communications to the degree where, if I'm remembering the statistic correctly, and I'll let you kind of fill in here, is that we're actually going to see more machine-to-machine data communication than we are going to see end user to application communication.
Yeah, thank you. I was worried for a second when you made that promise that I remembered this, that maybe I didn't. But yeah, you're right. So it's something like 51%. It's narrowly over the 50% mark. And I want to say the stat was around 2022 or 2023 that we were going to see that shift where over 50% of data on networks was going to be machine to machine in some capacity, as opposed to between users or between a user and a database or whatnot. So yeah, huge evolution in, what the data is. I think something else that's also interesting, and we see this, and it's at least 50% is wireless. And we see that today. We see that number growing exponentially. And I think we're going to continue to see that as return to work continues to go that direction post-pandemic. We've got everybody coming back into the office expecting a hybrid kind of working environment. We've all gotten used to video meetings, and obviously not everyone's going to go back to the office right away. So we've got to be able to support that. And I think we're going to see an influx in wireless traffic, and the demands for wireless networks to be very robust is going to continue to increase.
And I've heard, as those environments get set up and capacity is planned, and then we've got a massive influx of new technologies, and especially with that machine-to-machine communication that's going on. I've heard you guys talk about a use case with one of some folks that you helped out that were using forklifts, I think, that were laser guided within the warehouse. Do you want to kind of enlighten us with that story, Jeremy?
Actually, I'm going to kick that one to Rob because he was personally involved.
Oh, was that Rob? Sorry.
Before he,
sorry
no, that's
that,
all right.
Rob.
Before he got his fancy new title, this is one where he was a lead architect on. So I don't want to steal his thunder for that one.
Yeah. Well, we were all involved. There were a lot of folks that were involved in that project, but really kind of a cool outcome. We had a client that was a bottling organization that invested heavily in automation in their facilities on the business operations side to be able to, obviously optimize what they're doing, improve their product development, their product, packaging, and then shipping process. And at the end of the day, they measure their success based on how much product they're able to ship and then build. Well, so they implemented this laser-guided forklift system and started having a lot of problems with it. And at the end of the day, they should have called it Wi-Fi guided, not laser-guided, because the thing would absolutely stop if it loses a Wi-Fi connection. If it drops a few packets, it's out. So we were able to help this client look at an aged and legacy wireless environment and determine that they ultimately needed to make some changes. it did. We created a new architecture, did all the RF work to be able to ensure them success, and reduced forklift faults by 95%, which was really incredible because those forklifts move at a really good clip in those warehouses. And so from a safety perspective, I totally understand that if they lose their connection, they don't realize where they're at from either a laser or a Wi-Fi perspective. We want them to stop so the humans in that warehouse don't get run over by a forklift. So first off, we're super happy about the safety component. But the fact is that this client was actually able to come up with a measure of how much more product they were able to ship because of the optimized environment. And, it started with wireless. It started with optimizing that environment. But we also went in and did some other things for this client. We did some disaster recovery strategy and planning. We built out an entire NAC environment. So we transitioned them from pre-shared keys from a wireless perspective to 802.1x, where we do start with identity. We understand all of the devices, and in their case, many machines on the network and how they communicate. We manage the edge computing. Each facility has some level of compute for them to manage their business before they ultimately bring it back to the cloud or the data center. So really, it ties together this whole modern era that we're talking about. And this client's a perfect example of being able to succeed there and the flexibility that they were able to bring into their environment as a result. So yeah, Jeremy, thank you for the nod there. Super happy to have been a part of that. But a lot of smart folks were a part of that one. And an ongoing relationship where we continue to help that client innovate in what they're doing and how they're approaching their business from a technology perspective, which is, one of my favorite places to be, is to be thinking up those new outside the box kind of ways of going about solving complex problems.
And my favorite part of that story, there were a lot of great parts, but I loved how you led with the business aspects of it. I think, a lot of the times when people start thinking about the technology side, I was just on a call with a client yesterday, and they understood the technology, the folks that we were talking to, but they're like, we have to sell this to the board. We have to tell them the cost to benefit analysis of this investment that we're making. And I was like, well, trust us, we're business consultants who are security experts or experts in the technology or the delivery of this technology. And I think that is definitely an important aspect of this, doing something because it can be done. That's cool, but doing it because it enables the business to be able to be more efficient or to go to a market that they couldn't do, or to, even from a safety perspective, to allow the workers to be safer. Those are the things that I think is when it's the win-win-win of what we do. We killed it with a technology perspective. We took somebody and took them to a new place, but we also saved them money or made safety better. That's always awesome.
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't want to have that conversation where you can literally, you get investment for one site, and you can literally go back and be like, look, we can literally see, here's the date that we went live, and you can see the amount of product that went out of that facility increased. Like it literally had a revenue impact, like a positive impact on revenues for the company based off of the implementation of this particular technology. I mean, I'd take that conversation to a board of directors to get future investment any day, all day long, because it's proven.
And I love that note, because when we go ahead, sorry, Rob.
I was going to say that's one example, but I know there's another one, Jerry, and you were probably closer to this one than I was, where we did some incredible automation work, and the team that you drive ultimately was able to dig into some really manual processes. Because what we haven't mentioned is, we talked about the connectivity, we talked about the security, we talked about the data, and how we can manage it closer to the edge. But all of this is underpinned in management and orchestration and automation. You have to have all of those components to be able to make it successful. So I don't know, Jeremy, if you know the use case and the example I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Okay. Yeah. If you want to dive into that, I think that's super cool, just because I'm kind of an automation nerd. So taking all of the repetitive tasks, I hate repetitive tasks, and, making it something simple and saving people time, there's an ROI there as well.
100%. And I think this ties in really nicely, because if we think about the edge, right, again, we're having this conversation about the edge. We think about those different perimeters. What we haven't talked about is how we actually have to treat our interior, what has traditionally been seen as the inside of the edge, right? That's almost now a completely different edge, or kind of like interior edge, if you will. And it's almost on a per port basis. And that's really what we're talking about in this particular use case, is that it was a real estate company. And one of the challenges that they were having is that they had over 100 facilities across the country, and they would have people come in and attach devices to their network, completely outside of their purview of visibility. And so they were literally investing in the degrees of thousands of hours every year, people going through and making manual switch changes in order to be able to do traditional segmentation for those devices, right? So using VLANs and other types of techniques to go in, make manual configurations to switches across thousands of devices to help try and contain individual endpoints that were being connected with limited information about what that endpoint actually is. So one of the things that we were able to do was leverage security platforms and automation to actually come in to be able to dynamically profile devices as they got onboarded, whether they were wired or wireless, identify what type of device they had, align those to specific use cases, business use cases defined through policy by the organization, and then dynamically enforce policy down to that individual port with zero human interaction. So we were literally able to save hundreds, if not thousands of man hours on an annual basis that were being applied for basically throwaway work. Like it was reactionary. So there was already a potential exposure from a threat perspective. So they were going out doing reactionary interrupt work that would delay other projects. So we were able to increase security, reduce operational spend and increase efficiency, and allow them to drive future enhancements and project work internally with the reduction of interrupt work that was happening as a result of responding to these different types of events. So that one's, again, coming back to that thing we talked about, is as we increase security, we can't overburden our end users with that security platform. We actually want to try and do everything that we can to potentially even enhance their experience, to make their life better. And this is a great example where we did all of that. We were able to secure the environment, reduce spend on internal operations, and make it a much easier and more welcoming user experience for folks that were at those real estate facilities to be able to go in and connect devices that they need to run their facilities.
And I just have to inject a random stat here because this is how my brain works. But every time we talk about automation, especially on the network side, I think of this metric, and it's that 70% of changes on networks today happen manually. And if you think about, even the best of humans make errors. If you take that error rate and you're able to kind of reduce that error rate with some automation, you can really improve operations and the downtime and the impacts to facilities. And, all of that stuff gets better when you start adopting some automation and, a little bit more focus there. So, super excited. That's a great example, Jeremy. Thank you.
Yeah.
I love how that all comes together when we get the team engaged.
Yeah. I was going to say after the last story, but this one is just as much exciting, related to the fact that we started off with the conversation of complexity and folks coming to us not knowing what was going on, and finishing up with that understanding, that automation, that user experience change, that ROI. That's the true evolution of what is possible, and still even more. I think we all feel we're talking about these solutions that have been implemented, but we know there's bigger, better, faster, more still out there with the capabilities that are available to us right now, and that's exciting too. I think the way that approach that we take, we often have solutions that have multiple vendors involved, right? So that's one of those things where if you're engaged with oftentimes folks will go out and talk to vendor A and figure out what the solution is from there, and then vendor B and talk about, and it might be another component, not like for competition, but I need this piece, I need this piece, I need this piece. But putting all of that stuff together, that's difficult. And again, that's one of the things I get a kick out of when we go in, because that's kind of our approach, right? There's all of this technology that's got to get integrated. But again, there's that overarching, how we do it, the process, and how it's operationalized and, you know, put into practice, basically that build and transfer model we have so that the client can operationalize it. That's a really, really important aspect of the journey as well.
Yep. No, and you're spot on, Jason. And, you know, I think one other thing to consider is sometimes it isn't one or the other. Sometimes it is multiple. Like sometimes in order to be able to meet those outcomes, you do have to embrace multiple manufacturers to be able to get, you know, that particular service or feature out of product line A, but then you need to couple that with something out of product line B from a different manufacturer in order to be able to get to that kind of end state that you're looking to accomplish.
Absolutely. Well, gents, this has been a fun conversation. It sounds like we've got more to say on this topic, so maybe we'll be talking.
Connectivity. I'm feeling like I'm leaving people out. Oh my gosh, so long.
Well, good stuff. I think, you know, first of all, there's some great content related to what we've been talking about. We've got case studies, and we've got decks and PDFs and all of that fun stuff at our site at insightcdct.com. So there's lots of additional materials, and we really appreciate your comments. We review them all before we do the shows, and we try to tailor the things that we say to give you guys the best for your investment into watching us, and we really appreciate all the feedback that we're getting. So please keep that up as well. Jeremy, Rob, you guys rock. Thanks for joining me again, and thank you guys out there for all that you're doing to contribute, and we hope that the message is coming across loud and clear. And have a great day. Cheers.
Thanks, Jason.
Awesome. Thanks all.